The voice of Mr. Ed was so embarrassed by the role that he refused screen credit. He died at a Hollywood retirement home in 1973. 4 decades later, his co-star would die in that same hallway. Number 1 on this list is the man behind that voice. Allan Lane was born Harry Leonard Albertson in Mishawaka, Indiana, in 1909, and he spent 2 decades as one of the biggest cowboy stars in American B-movies. He was Red Ryder across 7 films. He was Rocky Lane across more than 30 B-westerns, with his horse Blackjack at his side. Children wore Rocky Lane posse patches and read Rocky Lane Western comic books. By 1961, that whole era had collapsed. The B-westerns were dead, and Lane could not find on-camera work. He took the voice job on Mr. Ed because he needed money, and he considered it a humiliation for a man who had once headlined stagecoach chases. When the show became a national hit, he went back to the producers and asked to have his name attached to it. They refused and offered him a raise instead. He took the money and the silence, and for the rest of his life, when strangers asked what he did for a living, he would not tell them about the most famous role he ever had. 6 weeks after a cancer diagnosis, on October 27, 1973, at the age of 64, Lane died at the Motion Picture and Television Country House in Woodland Hills, California, a rapid, brutal ending for a man whose face had once been on lunchboxes. His funeral was attended by 3 people beyond the minister and the funeral director. A star of more than 125 films was sent off by a congregation small enough to fit inside a single car. He is buried at Inglewood Park Cemetery in Inglewood, California. The next cast member on this list spent 6 years on a hit CBS sitcom, playing a wife who was allowed to speak roughly 1 complete thought per episode. Connie Hines was born Constance Jean Hines in Dedham, Massachusetts in 1931, and her future had essentially been arranged by her family. Her father was a Boston-based acting coach, her mother was an actress, and she appeared in her father's stock company plays as a child. In 1948, she was voted the most popular girl in her class at Dedham High School. She tried out for the senior class play and did not get a part. A decade later, newly divorced and nearly broke, she arrived in Hollywood in 1959, and within a year she had beaten out every other actress auditioning for Carol Post, the wife of the man who talked to a horse. As Carol, Hines played the patient foil, the woman who could not hear what her husband was hearing and could not understand why he was always in the barn. She played it with an openness that made every scene feel like she was still trying to catch up, which is exactly what the show needed. Allan Young, in a 1990 interview, called it the hardest job on the set. Hines once said bluntly that the role was just a paycheck. She later walked the remark back. The truth is that she was underused on a hit show for 6 years and never got another lead. In 1970, Hines married entertainment lawyer Lee Savin and retired from acting a year later at 40, and the two remained together 25 years until his death in 1995. Hines died from heart disease at her Beverly Hills home on December 18, 2009, at 78. A quiet ending for a woman who had spent her career reacting to other people's dialogue. A plaque bearing her name sits in the Rose Garden at Westwood Village Memorial Park in Los Angeles. A quick question before we continue. Of the wives, neighbors, and recurring players on this list, which one do you actually remember from your own watching of Mr. Ed, and why did they stick? At number 3 is the man whose death forced the show to rewrite half its cast. Larry Keating, born in St. Paul, Minnesota in 1899, was already a television veteran when Mr. Ed came to him. He had spent 5 years as Harry Morton on the George Burns and Gracie Allen show, where he had perfected the exact character George Burns wanted for the new horse sitcom, a suspicious, slow-burning neighbor who could not quite figure out the people living next door. Burns produced Mr. Ed, and he cast Keating because he knew nobody could do it better. As Roger Addison, Keating played the exasperated counterweight, a man always 2 steps behind Wilbur's ridiculous explanations, whose slow double takes did half the comedy. In February of 1963, during Season 3, Keating was diagnosed with leukemia. He returned for Season 4 that summer anyway, and filmed 4 episodes. He worked right up to the week before his death. On August 26, 1963, at the age of 64, he died at Good Samaritan Hospital in Los Angeles. a shock the cast never quite absorbed, and one Allan Young would still choke up describing 40 years later. The production did not publicly discuss how sick he had been. Keating left behind his wife Ruth, two biological sons including Captain Robert Keating of the United States Air Force, and a stepson, William Evans. He was the nephew of heavyweight boxing champion Tommy Burns, and as a boy, he had watched his uncle lose the world title to Jack Johnson in Sydney, Australia, in 1908. His final film, alongside Don Knotts, was released 7 months after he was already gone. He is entombed at Mount Calvary Cemetery in Portland, Oregon. The cast member we are about to tell you about walked away from Hollywood the year after Keating's funeral and spent the rest of her life landing trout in the Pacific Northwest. Fourth on this list is a woman born in Washington, D.C. in 1921, who was a genuine Broadway talent before Mr. Ed came along. Edna Skinner replaced Celeste Holm as Ado Annie in the original Broadway run of Rodgers and Hammerstein's Oklahoma. During World War II, she organized United States Treasury Department bond rallies featuring Fanny Brice, B. Lilly, and Gertrude Lawrence. As Kay Addison, she was the warm half of the Post's original neighbor couple, the one who hosted everything and smoothed over every argument. Her rapport with Larry Keating was what made the original foursome feel like actual people. When Keating died in 1963, producers briefly tried to write Kay as a widow. The decision came down against it. A different married couple, the Kirkwoods, was brought in instead, and Skinner, who had done nothing wrong, was quietly written out of the show. She retired in 1964 and never came back. Her life after Hollywood is the more interesting half of her story. She settled on the Oregon coast with her longtime companion, model and photographer Jean Fish, and the two were together more than 40 years. Skinner traveled more than 485,000 miles across the United States, chasing cutthroat trout and steelhead, and she published more than 280 articles for sports and fishing magazines. She died at her home in North Bend, Oregon, from heart failure on August 8, 2003, at the age of 82. A death that barely registered in the trades, for a woman who had barely wanted it to. Her body was cremated, and her ashes were scattered at sea. Coming in at 5 is a man whose real-life story is somehow more dramatic than anything his character ever did. Leon Ames, born Harry. Leon Wyckoff in Portland, Indiana, in 1902, was one of MGM's most reliable fathers for 3 decades. Mr. Smith in Meet Me in St. Louis, Mr. March in Little Women, Doris Day's dad in On Moonlight Bay. By the time he joined Mr. Ed in 1963 as retired Colonel Gordon Kirkwood, he had already appeared in more than 125 films. On February 12, 1964, during his first year on the show, an armed intruder broke into his home and held him and his wife Christine hostage, demanding $50,000. Ames called his business partner, who withdrew the money from a bank and delivered it to the house. The intruder tied Ames up, forced Christine to drive the getaway car, and locked the partner and a house guest in the trunk. Police caught the car. Everyone survived. It made the front page in Los Angeles. The kidnapping was not even the most historically important thing about him. In a secret meeting in June of 1933, he was one of 19 actors who founded the Screen Actors Guild. He served as its 11th president. He held a senior executive role for 30 years. He received the Seiji Life Achievement Award in 1980. He also quietly opened a string of Ford dealerships in California during the 1960s because a man who had spent 50 years in the industry understood what it meant to have a second income. Ames stayed married to Christine Gossett for 55 years. He died in Laguna Beach, California on October 12, 1993, from stroke complications at the age of 91. A long, completed life rather than an interrupted one. His grave sits at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Hollywood Hills, Los Angeles. Number 6 on this list was a film noir regular before he ever set foot on the Mr. Ed set. Barry Kelley was born in Chicago in 1908, and for most of the 1940s and 1950s, he was one of Hollywood's most dependable character heavies. A large man cast as tough cops, crooked bureaucrats, and skeptical judges. He was Lieutenant Dietrich in John Huston's The Asphalt Jungle. He was in Elmer Gantry, The Manchurian Candidate, and Knock on Any Door with Humphrey Bogart. He played Mr. Higgins, Carol Post's permanently disapproving father, in 11 episodes across 4 years of Mr. Ed. The physical presence he brought to those 11 appearances is what made Higgins land. When he showed up at the door, Wilbur actually looked smaller. During the same years he was scowling at Allan Young on CBS, he was scowling at Frank Sinatra in one of the greatest political thrillers ever filmed. Kelley died of natural causes in Woodland Hills, Los Angeles County, on June 15, 1991, at the age of 82. An ordinary ending for an actor whose face had supported some of the most extraordinary films of his era. He is buried at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Hollywood Hills, Los Angeles, the same cemetery where Leon Ames would be interred 2 years later. The cast member we are about to name went on to win the Oscar, Tony, and Emmy that most of the people he worked with on this show never had a chance to chase. 7th on the list is Jack Albertson, born in Malden, Massachusetts in 1907 to Russian Jewish immigrants. He spent 60 years in the margins of show business before anyone outside the industry learned his name. He worked vaudeville. He worked burlesque as a straight man to Phil Silvers on the Minsky circuit. He did Broadway supporting roles for decades. He appeared in 7 episodes of Mr. Ed as Paul Fenton, brother to Kay Addison, between 1961 and 1964. A stopgap regular who helped fill in after Larry Keating's death. At the age of 57, he played the hard-drinking Irish father in The Subject Was Roses on Broadway. He won the Tony for it. 4 years later, reprising the role on film, he won the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor. He played Grandpa Joe in Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory in 1971. He played Manny Rosen in The Poseidon Adventure a year later. From 1974 to 1978, he won an Emmy playing Ed Brown on Chico and the Man, joining the rare group of only 24 people ever to win the Triple Crown of acting. In 1978, he was diagnosed with colon cancer and told almost no one. He kept working. His final theatrical role, as Amos Slade in Disney's The Fox and the Hound, was released 4 months before his death. Albertson died at his Hollywood Hills home on November 25, 1981, at the age of 74, an exit so private that most of his industry did not know he was sick. His body was cremated, and his ashes were scattered in the Pacific Ocean. If you are still with us at this point, consider subscribing. We build these cast-by-cast retrospectives so that nobody on this list disappears quietly, even the ones whose industries tried to let them. 8th on the list is the neighbor who arrived after the original couple was gone. Florence MacMichael was born in Hagerstown, Maryland, in 1919, and before Winnie Kirkwood, she had built a steady character actress career. Broadway productions of On the Town and Auntie Mame, an appearance on The Twilight Zone in the episode titled Mr. Beavis, multiple spots on Alfred Hitchcock Presents, and a 3-episode run as Mrs. Pearson on My Three Sons. A graduate of the American Academy of Dramatic Arts, she had also played Barney Fife's girlfriend, Hilda May, opposite Don Knotts on The Andy Griffith Show. Winnie Kirkwood was the meddling, endlessly helpful housewife who replaced Kay Addison when the original neighbors were written out. MacMichael played her with a Maryland directness that felt like it had been perfected over 1,000 conversations across a backyard fence. When Mr. Ed ended in 1966, she was already 47, and the parts for character women her age were thinning. A Disney film in 1968, The Horse in the Gray Flannel Suit, gave her one more credit. She quietly retired in the early 1970s, married her second husband, James L. McCoy, in 1971. 5 years after the show ended, and stayed with him for 28 years. The coastal town of Cambria, California, became her quiet home for the rest of her life. MacMichael died at her Cambria home on May 28, 1999, at the age of 80, the kind of death that makes an obituary editor reach for the show title to remind readers who she was. She is buried at Cambria Cemetery in Cambria, San Luis Obispo County, California. Number 9 is somebody whose voice you have heard even if you have no idea who he is. Sheldon Allman was born in Chicago in 1924, raised in Canada, and served in the Royal Canadian Air Force during World War II before moving to Los Angeles to study at the Los Angeles Conservatory of Music. Whenever Mr. Ed broke into song, and the show's writers let him sing far more often than a single sitcom horse should, the voice you heard was not Allan Lane. It was Allman. He was uncredited, the same way Lane was uncredited, because the production kept both performers invisible to preserve the illusion that the horse could actually talk. He did not just sing Ed's songs, he wrote them. The Pretty Little Filly with the Ponytail and the Empty Feedbag Blues were his compositions. In 1967, Allman and his writing partner Stan Worth sat down at Allman's home at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. By 4 o'clock, they had written the theme songs to George of the Jungle, Super Chicken, and Tom Slick. In 1960, Allman had also released a novelty album of atomic-era satires called Folk Songs for the 21st Century, with titles like Crawl Out Through the Fallout. That same song, written 64 years earlier, would close the first episode of Amazon's Fallout television series in 2024. Allman died of heart failure at his home in Culver City, California, on January 22, 2002, at the age of 77, a quiet ending for the uncredited voice whose work outlived almost everyone who worked alongside him. He is buried at Hillside Memorial Park in Culver City. The last living thing we need to discuss is not a person. It is the horse, and his grave may not actually be his grave. The 10th name on this list is a Palomino gelding born in the Los Angeles area in 1949, and for 6 seasons he was the title character of one of the most popular shows on CBS. Bamboo Harvester was an American saddlebred and Arabian cross trained by Les Hilton, a protege of Will Rogers who had also worked with the mules in the Francis the Talking Mule films. Hilton initially used a nylon thread in the horse's mouth to simulate talking, but Bamboo eventually learned to move his lips on command. He would sometimes start mouthing lines on his own whenever Allan Young stopped speaking. The horse was, by every account, the most professional actor on the set. When the show ended in 1966, he was quietly retired. In 1968, age-related kidney problems and arthritis set in. In 1970, while Les Hilton was out of town visiting family, a temporary caregiver found Bamboo lying on the ground and, thinking the horse was in distress, administered a tranquilizer. He died within hours. He was 21 years old. A second Palomino named Pumpkin, who had posed for publicity photographs during the show's run, survived until 1979, and when that horse died in Oklahoma, most of the country assumed the real Mr. Ed had just passed. Allan Young knew it was not. He did not correct the story because he did not want to disappoint anyone. A granite marker was placed at Snodgrass Farm in Tahlequah, Oklahoma, in 1990, where fans visit to this day. Whether that is actually the horse from the show remains an open question. The real Bamboo Harvester was cremated, and Les Hilton scattered his ashes at a private location in the Los Angeles area, which brings us to the last name on this list and back to the hallway. Allan Young, born Angus Young in North Shields, England, in 1919, came to Mr. Ed after he had already won Emmys for Best Actor and Outstanding Personality on his own CBS variety show a decade earlier. TV Guide had once called him the Charlie Chaplin of television. George Burns cast him as Wilbur Post because, in Burns's words, he looked like the kind of guy a horse would talk to. Young played Wilbur as a sweet, permanently apologetic man whose whole face collapsed into a worried smile whenever Ed got him into trouble. It was precision comedy. It typecast him for a decade. After Mr. Ed ended in 1966, he essentially disappeared from television, drove across America, lectured for Christian Science, and did not return in any meaningful way until the mid-1970s. Voice work brought him back. For more than 40 years, he was the official voice of Scrooge McDuck in Mickey's Christmas Carol DuckTales, and a dozen Disney projects after that, one of the longest continuous voice roles in animation history. In his final years, Young suffered financial difficulties and declining health, and his 4 children fell into open disagreement over who should control his care and estate. He spent more than 4 of his final years at the Motion Picture and Television Country House and Hospital in Woodland Hills, the same facility where Allan Lane had died in 1973. On May 19, 2016, Allan Young died there of natural causes at the age of 96 with his children at his side. 43 years after the voice of his horse had gone, the man the horse had talked to went the same way, in the same building, down what was very likely the same hallway. He was buried at sea. 11 cast members brought Mr. Ed to life. Every one of them is now gone. The barn is empty, the neighbors are empty, and Wilbur Post and his horse are both finally, permanently, quietly, out of frame.